And those that are listening, if you haven't seen it, you've got to go and you can stream it for free on Amazon. In fact, it's really an extraordinary documentary, not just to learn about the story and the phenomenal example that is Coach Dale Brown, but it's really actually incredibly entertaining and very inspiring. But in that story, I learned a lot about where a lot of your inspiration comes from. And we really can't get to know Coach Dale Brown, I think, until we know the origin story. And that origin story is when the welfare lady criticized your mother. And it seems that moment you've always been sort of fighting for the little guy, trying to rectify an injustice. It's been really the narrative of your entire life. And I think it was one of the great strengths of your coaching ability on the court, too, with seemingly untalented teams, driving them to great excellence. And we'll get to that. But tell us that origin story and then what that story has meant to you through your whole life up until this point right now.
I'd come home from lunch, not having money to eat out. I ran home for my little bowl of soup, and there was a welfare worker. And I could see she was intimidating my mother. My mother was the most pathologically honest, beautiful. Thank God I had a mother like her. Never complained about the husband that left her or was negative or cynical at all. But she was intimidating my mother, and I'm eating there, drinking that soup, and I look over and listen to her, and she said, Mrs. Brown, do you know, Ward County Welfare, we're giving you $42.50 a month. And, last month, you spent $13 on digitalis. I had no idea what digitalis was. She said, and she how about him, like I'm a dog. How about him? Can't he have a job? Now, my mother's almost in tears. She said, well, ma'am, he does. He sells paper. Well, he's got to get some kind of a, go get your purse. And I'm sitting there watching this, and she took my mother's purse. Are you hoarding money away? And I remember looking over at her, Darren, just like it was 16 seconds ago, and seeing this terrible injustice upon my mother. And I thought at that time, and I'm saying 10, 11, 12, I'm not positive, I thought never again in my life will I see an injustice to my mother, to a loved one, or anyone else that I'm not going to stand up and be counted. So because of that welfare worker, I think that was the catalyst for me to stand up for injustices.
Well, you definitely have been drawn to the underdog and have done extraordinary things as a result of this. I do think it was one of your great advantages. I want to get to some more of your advice as a coach. And if you were to boil it down, give somebody something to focus on in becoming a great coach. From your perspective, what do you think is the number one job of the coach? If they were to say, okay, my job description is X, what is that?
I think it's this. Basketball is a rather simple game. So if you're going to coach, and it's like in business or anything else, simplicity is often the mark of wisdom. John Wooden told me one time, I'm not being humble, Dale, but there's no area of basketball which I'm a genius. None. Tactfully and strategically, I'm just average. And that's not offering false modesty. We won national championships while I was coaching at UCLA because I was above average in analyzing players, getting them to fill their role as a part of a team, and I wanted them to know I loved them, but I was going to discipline them at the same time. And he also was a master of getting people to come to their potential. And I think everything's so negative and cynical nowadays. And the other secret, I think, in working with young people or older people or anything else, he said, I always told my players, and this is what I said, don't ever try to be better than anyone else, but never cease to be the best you can be, because you'll go crazy trying to mimic or catch somebody else. But if you can just give what God's given you, be the best you can be, man, you'll be on top.
Amazing. You talk about John Wooden, and I know the great influence he was in your life. Another, just an extraordinary human being that I have great reverence for. And you said that in one of the interviews you did, that advice John Wooden gave you was to not try and be a genius coach, but practice simplicity with constant repetition. Talk about how that advice helped you and how we can use it in our life, not just on the court.
Darren, I spent four long days and nights, and he didn't. He treated me so wonderfully and gracefully. You know, here's the greatest coach that ever lived, and here's a no-name coach, his first head coaching job. I spent day and night with him in his home and in the office and with friends and etc. So I'm getting ready to leave that particular day, and he walks me to the car, and I throw my bag in the trunk. He said, Dale, I'm really glad you came. He said, it's given us a chance to bond and everything. But he said, really, it wouldn't have been necessary for you to come. He said, I'm going to tell you the 3 secrets of being successful. He said, number 1, he said, always make sure you have better players than anybody else. Now, at first, I kind of, hey, he's being facetious, I was thinking. He said, and number 2, make sure those better players always put the team above themselves, and they understand from the time you're recruiting them that the best potential of me is we. Finally, Dale, he said, don't try to be some coaching genius or guru. He said, always practice simplicity with constant repetition. Pretty basic, and that's what I got out of 1972 visit.
You know, another trait that I also point to John Wooden for describes you as well. Your former players describe you as a coach who cared. While it seems obvious, I think it's unfortunately not a well-practiced trait of many leaders. I mean, they pay lip service to it, but I mean, I'm talking truly caring. So explain how truly caring for the people that you coach, and not just the outcome of working, but how ultimately caring gets you to the goal.
I'll tell you where I learned it from. I don't mean this at all to be narcissistic, but I was the leading scorer in the history of North Dakota high school basketball. Now, there's only 11 people in North Dakota, so that's not the greatest accomplishment. But anyway, I broke the record in the quarter mile. I was a captain of the football team. I was the class president. I was an honor student. And I went to a little tiny Catholic school. We played the biggest schools in the country. So every Monday, we had to have an eligibility slip. Now, even though I didn't study, it just sort of came natural. I'm not even sure I opened a book at the time, and I certainly wasn't a valedictorian or salutatorian, but I'm come down to the ex-coaches now, the principal. I throw my eligibility slip. Every Monday at 1 o'clock, we had to have this slip down there. So I threw it on his desk. I'm walking out of the office. Dale, come on back here. And I walk back. Yes, Coach? He said, what is this? I said, that's my eligibility slip. He said, what time was it due in this office? I said, 1 o'clock. He said, what time does it say on the wall up here on the clock? I said, 1:15. That's good. You knew this was your eligibility slip. You knew it was due at 1 o'clock. And he said, you knew that 1:15, you're late. And he started ripping it up in a little piece of paper and threw it in the garbage can. He said, so, young man, you're not going on the road trip this week. I thought, I'm not going on the road trip. We're playing the 2 biggest schools in the state. Superstar. I'm going to go. So I go back upstairs. Guess who stood in the driveway with tears in his eyes? Now, that same coach, shortly after that, and I've got a chip on my shoulder, and this is really stimulates me, what I'm going to tell you, and I may get emotional all these years later. I was in a class with a nun, went to an all-Catholic school, and the nuns had those long habits, and she was a mean nun. She'd slap you with a ruler and hit you in the back of the head. So we're going out of the room, and one of the guys said, what do you think of her? And I said, I won't say the exact words, but I did say she's an SOB, which you know what it represents. Little did I know, she heard this because I thought she was deaf. 15 minutes later, there's a knock on the door. It's the ex-coach. Dale Brown, please. I walked out in the hall and I'm against the locker. And he said, Dale, what did you call the sister in this last class? He's right in my face now. And he's a leader now. Well, my leader abandoned me, so I was defensive with male leaders. And I said, I swore at sister. Oh, you swore? That's what you said? I swear at you? I thought, I'm not going to say this. I said, I called her an SOB. That's the words you used, SOB? I said, no, what words did you use? I said, I called her a son of a bitch. He grabbed me by the shirt, and he banged my head off the locker, and he's twisting my shirt. Well, in the meantime, I'm folding my fist to the right, and I thought, yeah, that's typical male. As soon as he lets me go, I'm going to knock him across the hall. That represented the dad that left me and everything. And he's squeezing the back of my neck hard. And he slaps me in the back, and then he's still, I want to tell you something, man. You got a bright future ahead of you. God don't make any junk. And I'm still going to hit him. And he's squeezing my neck and got my shirt all messed up. I thought, as soon as he lets go, I'm going to hit him. And he tapped me one more time. He said, I love you, Dale Brown. And he turned around and walked down the hall. I turned and looked at him, and I thought, that's the first man that ever told me he loved me. He gave me tough love. He used to come to games. I'd see him stand by the water fountain. I didn't need the astronauts, the cosmonauts needed a rocket to go to the moon. I could jump to the moon. So that's what I tried to do. Make young men feel good about themselves. Give them constructive criticism.
You know, it's funny, this story is a lot from what I studied with Coach K, who's also going to be in the same issue here. He talked about, sometimes you need to get in somebody's face. Sometimes you need to give somebody a pat on the back. Sometimes you need to give them a hug. And sometimes you just need to say anything. And he said, you just need to know what to do, to whom, and when, because it's different every time. So speaking of Shaquille O'Neal and speaking of tough love and accountability, I heard a story about how one time in particular, you barged into Shaquille O'Neal's dorm room, woke him up, and made him run laps endlessly because he skipped class. So recount that story for us and explain why accountability in your players mattered so much.
I never ever wanted to use a player in any way. There were simple rules. Well, one of them is I'm obligated. These children were sent to me by their parents, so I'm obligated to make sure that I get them something beyond just a basketball, give them something more important. So I stressed academics. So when Shaquille first came, he stuttered. I put him in a speech class. Speech class? Well, you're going to be in a speech class. Someday you're going to be famous. You're going to have to talk. So he was real good for a period. He came the very class he ever took. First class, he came and he had to do a speech. He came and asked me if I could shut the doors and turn the phones off, and could I critique his speech, and then could I go to class with him? Well, about 2 weeks later, my assistants normally did this, but they found out Shaquille missed his class. Now, I've given an obligation. I was in Germany when I met his father, who was a sergeant. I told his mother when they came back to San Antonio. She stressed so many times, and she was the glue of that family. She wanted her son educated. Nobody in her family's ever been educated. By the way, she went back and got a college degree. So I told her I'll do everything in my power. So I kept on telling Shaquille, don't miss class, man. So they come, guess who missed class today? I took off up the back step. Yesterday, I went up the back steps about 4 or 5 in the morning. I have a master key. I opened the door. I put my hand on his chest. Shaquille. And this big old giant, he was curled up like a question mark in his bed that was too small. He opened up his eyes, kind of shocked, and I said, get up, where are we going? I said, we're going over the track. What for? I said, you'll see. So we get over there, and several times, Coach, I can't do it anymore. And you can't miss class anymore. So we're going to run till you give me a commitment today, because I've given a commitment to your mother and father, and I don't want to be a charlatan or a phony, that you're going to get a degree from here. Well, guess what happened? Guess who wound up with the highest GPA on the team? Guess who wound up with his doctorate degree? So it wasn't just about basketball.
Extraordinary, really. So if you were to kind of boil some of these techniques down, Coach, and I know that this is tough, but if you were to explain some of the best techniques that you've used to draw the very best from your players out, that you could recommend that we can use with our teams and possibly even with ourselves, what would be one or two of those techniques? What comes to mind?
Well, let me use it in my area, and I think it's diversified with your families, with your businesses, whatever. I believe that the parents that sent us their most precious possessions, their hopes for the future, their tomorrows, their kids themselves, they're due a lot more from those of us who dedicate ourselves to this profession. We owe them a vision of life, and it cannot be just limited to what happens on a basketball court. We owe them a sense of right and wrong. We must tell them what we do, for better or worse, will have consequences that inevitably there'll be a piper to pay. We must teach them there's not a law of nature, that the end always justifies the means. More wrong is committed against humanity with this flawed philosophy than perhaps any other. We must show them, the people under us, we've got to show them the dignity within themselves, and equally important, to respect the dignity of others. We must teach, whether it be in a classroom, whether it be in a basketball court, whether it be in a business, we must teach them that their word is sacred, that what they say must be true. For if not, they're only shells and not men. And then finally, all of us that are leaders, we've got to broaden their visions of the world so their lives are not focused just on the next game to the conclusion of all else. And time again, all of us eventually, we're going to have to tell the people that are under us goodbye. As we study them now as men, we must study ourselves. What have we done with them? Are they better? Are they worse? Are they more than we got? Are they less? They are living records of our own failures and success. And really, that's what coaching's about. That's what leadership's about. I am so grateful that coach that day that was ready to deck me and bloodied my lower lip when he pushed me against the locker, I probably would have never learned the lesson had he turned and said to me, I love you, Dale Brown. First male that ever said he loved me.
Well, speaking of lessons, Coach, I'm sure that your players taught you some lessons that you weren't expecting. You weren't always the teacher. I'm sure you are an avid learner yourself. So share a story or two where you found yourself in a reverse role.
There was a young man I learned something from. It was a guy by the name of Ricky Blanton, 6'6", forward for us. We lost 3 centers in 1986. A 7-footer from Yugoslavia that got a knee injury, a 7-footer from the Dominican Republic who I suspended, and my backup, my third center, a 6'8" center from Louisiana who was declared ineligible. I had no centers left. There weren't anybody. I called him in the office, and I was trying to teach him something. He taught me something. And I told him, Ricky, I'm going to move you to center. And his eyes got big as saucers. And he said, Coach, what? I said, moving you. I've never played center in my life. And I said, I don't care if you've never played center. I believe you can play center. If the French call it idée fixe, Rick, whatever you fix in your mind, you'll become. If you do it, I'll help you every day. I'll work extra with you. Let me tell you what he taught me. The great evangelist that I thought I was. That guy led us to the Final Four. We were the lowest seed ever to go to the Final Four. We should have never made it. We had no players left. He played center. He beat the Big Ten center. He beat a number 1 draft choice from Memphis State, who was a lottery pick. We went on and he beat John Sally, who was a lottery pick from Georgia Tech. He beat Kenny Walker, maybe the best player in the SEC. He put us on his back. And so I thought, you know what, young man, you've taught me something. I always used to throw around this. The impossible is what nobody can do until somebody does it. I now know that's true. I've seen him do it.
Well, that really sets up this question that I got for you, Coach, and it might be a tough question. It's certainly one that requires some introspection. I think this fight for the underdog has definitely been one of your greatest strengths and has heralded you to the resume that you've got on Wikipedia these days. And in fact, you coached some of the lowest seeded teams to ever make it to the Final Four, players that didn't even go on to the NBA. At the same time, you also coached some of the most talented teams that didn't do well.
That's right.
Because they didn't gel. When you look back on it, what does that say about your leadership style? But what did you learn? What would you do different now in that situation? What's your reflection back on both sides of the spectrum?
That's what a great question. And let me now, without prolonging it, I'll tell you what it does. After 44 years of coaching, 25 of those at LSU, my wife and I decided to take a month off and decide what to do with our lives. Was I going to go to law school? Was I going to run for U.S. Senate? Was I going to be a motivational speaker? Were we just going to travel around the world? Where were we going to live? During that month, I tried to honestly examine my coaching career. Now, I really did think that I was doing my very best. And what really became clear to me after 44 years was teaching is an art that's so great and so difficult to master that a man can spend a lifetime at it without realizing much more than his limitations, his mistakes, and his distance from the ideal. That's what hit me. Number 2, the point you brought up, the best talent I had by far. I had 3 first-round picks on that team. We did not make it to the Final Four. There were 2 reasons. Number 1, the biggest reason, I didn't do a good enough job. I kind of coasted a little bit. I'm shocked to say that to myself, but I'd always been digging and clawing, and I was much better being the underdog than I was being on top of the mountain, so to speak. So I thought, hey, I've clawed and dug my whole life since I've been 10 years of age. My mother told me I had to get a job. I walked up and down the streets of that little town, got a job at a jewelry store, cleaning the windows, carrying out garbage, sweeping the floors. A job that I'm sure they made up for me. Everything was, now all of a sudden, man, I got one of the greatest players in the country. I think I coasted. Number 2, I should have never run a double post offense. Number 3, this is the biggest reason. We did not have a leader on the team. Chris Jackson, Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, who led the nation in scoring the year before, one of the most sensitive, gentle young men that had a terrible case of Tourette syndrome and neurological disorder. He was a miracle that he even played. Number 2, Stanley Roberts, a 7-footer who was a freshman with Shaquille. He was a nice guy, more talent than Shaquille. Shaquille struggled his freshman year. In fact, I benched him. So I would go back without blaming anybody. I think those things were the reason we didn't go to the Final Four. I don't think I had that kind of talent before. If I had it again, I would work differently. And, of course, hindsight's always 20/20. And that puts it in a nutshell. And
I've always found that you tell me whatever your greatest strength is, and I'll also show you your greatest weakness. And I would much rather you have the strength of fighting for the underdog and making right the injustices of the world that you've done not only through basketball but far and wide outside of basketball. So it's just part of the pendulum of the opposite of the duality of life, so to speak. So over your years as a coach, you've had an innumerous number of great experiences. Tell us about one particular occasion as a coach that has really stuck with you. One of the more positive and uplifting coaching moments that you ever had as you look back over the whole spectrum.
Man, you're tough to deal with. I thought this was going to be simple. I hate to diminish any of the other wonderful stories, but I think there are two stories that really make me feel good. The Los Angeles Lakers were playing in Indiana, in Indianapolis, the Pacers. Now, had they lose the game that night, the series is over. Indiana wins the world championship. That morning, I got a call from a woman in Indianapolis, and she told me, Coach Brown, she said, I'm originally from Louisiana, and she said, I see the Lakers are playing here. Shaquille was on the team then. She said, my son has brain cancer. They've operated. We don't know if he's going to live. She said he's in and out of a coma. She said, is there any way at all I could give you my cell number? And he could just say my son's name, so if he does die, he can die listening to his hero. And I said, I can't promise it. This is a big game for them. But I said, I'll call him, and I hope he can do it. She was very nice. She said, well, I hope I'm not, abrasive by this call. I said, you're certainly not. So I called him. When he's going to do something, he always says, I got you, Coach. 2 years later, I'm sitting in my favorite restaurant in Baton Rouge. And this woman walks over to the table. Excuse me, Coach Brown. She said, I'm whatever her name was, and I'm sorry I can't remember it right now. She said, I'm the lady that called you from Indianapolis. Oh, yes, I said. And I got up and shook her. I said, your little son, he had brain cancer. And I said, you asked me to have Shaquille call. Did he call? She said, no, he didn't, Coach Brown. I said, he didn't. She said, no, Coach Brown. He came to the hospital. She said he sat 1 hour on game day, singing songs, telling jokes, stroking my son's head, kissing him on the forehead. And she said, my son woke up, they laughed, and they played. That's a story that I will never, ever, ever forget. The fact that he listened. There's a light year of difference between listening and hearing. Hearing, it goes in one ear and out the other. Listening is when you really comprehend and put into your head. And I always used to say, if you get to that top, always reach down and help the lower person. He did that. Then the second story. I had a player by the name of Stanley Roberts for 20-plus years. He grew up in a trailer, slept on the floor in South Carolina. No one in their family had been to, gotten a college degree. I told his mama, I said, I'll do everything. Well, he was in and out of the NBA, played with the Harlem Globe, 20 years. I stayed after him. I said, now listen, I may not live as old as Methuselah, and he lived to be 969, but I'm going to try for it. I'm going to be on your back. You promised your mother. I promised your mother. Stanley, please come back. Now, here's a big giant. Things hadn't gone well for him in the NBA like they should have. I was there the day that I wheeled his mother in that wheelchair for his graduation at LSU. So those two stories, now they have nothing to do with what went on in the basketball court. It's what went on outside of the court.
You got me choked up there. I mean, well, the thing that you've done is you've used this platform of success that you've had on the basketball court to do all these incredible things outside the court, which I find one of the reasons why I find you so admirable. It's just on the opposite side of that, because obviously there aren't all great successes, and those listening need to know that there are the opposite side of the story. So when were there times when you wondered, why you ever became a coach? Describe one or more of your trying experiences as a coach and what you learned from it, and ultimately how it made you better, either as a person or as a coach.
I never ever felt in my 44-year career, I never felt ever, even when a guy would screw up a last play at a time, I never felt a player ever lost a game. I went home after any defeat. I went home thinking, I could have done better. Now, obviously, I wasn't Denny the dimwit. I knew there were some things they obviously did wrong, misunderstood, or whatever. But I never wanted to ever blame anybody. And when you're talking about some of the things you could do different, we went through 17 years, 15 straight national tournaments, 17 years without a losing season. Everything was going unbelievable. And bingo, you know what hit us, Darren? Fairly easy. Our IQ is important. But our FQ was far more important. I hadn't failed 17 years. We were a dominant force. We'd beaten Kentucky 18 times. All of a sudden, the roof came down in. We had a losing season. Oh, man, is Brown over the hill? Is the recruiting gone down? Maybe he's been here too long. And it really hit me clearly. It's like an inauguration parade. No one looks bad in an inauguration parade. It all looks good. So at that time, all of a sudden, I went home, and all of a sudden, it made me so mad. I said to myself, I can't believe how ungrateful I am, Dale Brown. I'm feeling bad about this. Big mouth. I'm teaching. It's your FQ that counts. It's your failure quotient. How much can you take? John Wooden was a perfect example. John Wooden was at UCLA 14 years before he ever went to a Final Four. Now, I talked to one of the men that was involved. They had met in breakfast in Westwood to get rid of him. These three big donors were going to go see the president the next day. The one guy backed out and called the president and told, listen, we had a meeting and I feel bad I even went to it, but these guys are going to show up. I'm not going to show up. However, if you fire John Wooden, I'll do everything in my power. I'll take the money back I gave for this new building. Well, in the great wisdom they had, they decided to keep John Wooden. Well, the next 12 years, he did a fairly good job. He won 10 national championships. Nowadays, the immediate gratification syndrome, John Wooden would have been fired. And then finally, whenever I felt failure, when I felt, oh, should have I done this? Is there an easier way? Should I do something else? Some of the other offers I had to do other things. I got thinking, hold on. My wife's daddy was a Gandhi dancer on the railroad right up on the Canadian border for $7,500 a year. My mother was a maid, 50 cents an hour. She cleaned people's homes and I'm complaining about I can't. It's far greater than just wins and losses.
Well, the unfortunate part of this experience is that all of our listeners can't see you. And so they if they don't know you personally, they have to imagine they're listening to a man in his 40s and his 50s with that vigor and fire that is in your voice. What they probably don't know is that this year you'll be 80. And I
am approaching Methuselah. Thanks for bringing it up, Darren.
When I was having a conversation with Don Yeager last night, just to get some more insight on you, and he said, he's still waking up every morning and scouring the newspapers, looking for injustices to fight. And I really think that sort of describes the narrative of your entire life. But Coach, last question for you. When it's all said and done, how do you want to be remembered? What do you hope that they say about you when you're no longer here to coach them?
Darren, you're an expert at what you're doing, but that is the toughest question for this reason. It's almost, whatever I answer is almost narcissistic. I don't want a monument built. I don't need a monument. I don't need to be in the Hall of Fame. I never planned it. I never thought it. I never deserved it. But there's one thing that I do hope, and in all my imperfections, that I hope they do really realize that I truly love them all. I did really recruit a human being first and a basketball player second, and never in my life did I ever try to exploit any of them in any way possible. Now, that all sounds, there's been phony charlatans and evangelists saying that garbage for years, but I really, in my heart, that's what I tried to do. And when I retired, I got a call from a writer from New York, and he was real nice at first. Congratulations on your great career. You're the second winningest coach in SEC history. He said, Coach, the criticism on you is you spent too much time outside of basketball, that maybe if you'd have spent more time on the court and doing things, and he said that you did a lot of things in charity and you did this, how would you reply to that? And I remember the call vividly that day in 1997, and I said, my reply would be this. If we were getting ready for the Final Four and I had one practice left, and a mother called me and told me she had a son in New Orleans, and he was the biggest basketball fan. He's a senior in high school. He got in a car accident. He doesn't have another day to live. But he loves the LSU basketball team. Could I give him an autographed ball? We'd even put it in his coffin. I'd drive to New Orleans and let my assistants take over practice. And I'm sure there's a lot of people thought he probably did that too much. But I always looked at coaching. I wanted to win so badly. Who wants to win more than the coach? But I told the team when they'd go out and play that game, I wrote on the board, big capital letters, HIT. I said, now we're walking out in that Superdome. We're going to Pauley Pavilion. We're at the Final Four in Philadelphia or in Dallas. I said, all kinds of people in media, but you know what's important? We sit in here and bond. If you do these things, if you put the HIT philosophy, we can be happy. And it's fairly simple. The H in HIT stands for, did you play your hardest? And only you will know that. Did you really, truly play your hardest? Number 2, the I in HIT. Did we as a team play intelligent? Did we know when to pull the ball back? Did we know when to foul? Did we know when to run this? Were we intelligent the way we played? And 3, the T, and boy is this a big one, and you guys have heard this so many times. It's called, the T stands for togetherness. Did we really believe that the best potential of me is we? There's been no more flawed thing. Nations have crumbled. There have been 21 notable civilizations in the history of the world. 19 of those crumbled from within, not invaded from without, crumbled from within. If you do those, if we can, all of us come in here afterward and say, I played as hard as I could, I played as intelligent, we played together, I'm very comfortable with the results. And I know that sounds, that's kind of Pollyanna, isn't it? No, it's not. It's what life should be about.
Well, Coach Dale Brown, I want to tell you, we not only admire your tremendous success, but we appreciate your example, the dedication that you've taken on to take the fight on for those who couldn't fight for themselves is truly extraordinary and admirable character in the history of our humanity. I appreciate you very much coming and sharing your story with us here at Success. Thanks so much for being with us today, Coach.
Darren, may I end this by saying one thing?
Mm-hmm.
When you gave me that nice compliment, and I thank you for that, it's most gracious. I've been with John Wooden so many times, and one particular time we're having dinner, and this young man comes up, 40-some years old in a suit, and he came up, Coach Wooden. He said, I don't want to shake your hand. I don't want a picture. He said, I don't need an autograph. I just want to tell you, you are one of God's angels. He said, you are a legend that no one will ever forget. You are a hero of heroes. And he looked up at the young man. What's your name, young man? Darren Hardy's my name. Well, Darren, I can't tell you how nice that was what you just said to me, and it meant a lot to me. But let me say this to you, Darren. I want you to know this. I'm not what I ought to be, not what I could be, not what I should be, but I'm sure glad I'm not what I used to be, but it was sure nice of you to give me those nice compliments. I say the same to you, Darren. Thank you for the nice compliments.